Hello and welcome to Weird Heat. I'm your host, Brian Altano, and with me is Max Scoville.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Weird Heat is a show about concepts and life and growing up, and it's sort of an open-ended discussion about specific themes and ideas.
Yeah, it's a hard one to explain, but
Yes.
really it's sort of our guide to the universe, I guess. That's
We'll
sort
do
of
what
one
we
way of
can,
looking at it.
yeah.
One idea we've been kicking around, this was actually sort of one of the founding principles of this show,
Yes.
is the concept of growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a tough one.
I mean, the secret of that is that we're still kind of in the process of doing that.
Yeah. I don't think that ever really stops.
That's something like, I mean, I think the idea is that when you become, at a certain point, you become an adult.
Yep.
And I think we are both adults. I think.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
I'm not sure about it.
Legally in America, that is quantified by becoming 18, which means that you have to go to jail harder for crimes.
Right. And of course, no 18-year-old is actually an adult.
No.
In terms of actual what they do in the world, what
No.
they do when they get out there, and that's fine. What really totally threw me for a loop was I think I turned 30 a year and a half ago. I saw my age pop up on some forum, and they're like 31, and I'm like, oh shit, that's right, I'm 31. I totally forgot that I've been over 30 for that long, and that always reads to me as like that's a grown up, that's a real grown up, but I don't feel like a grown up.
I don't know when when that kicks in.
Does that ever kick in?
I think it's like you're always looking a couple steps ahead of you as kind of like, that guy really grew up. He's got his shit together. But I think becoming an adult, a big part of that is realizing that that's not entirely true.
Yeah. I mean, I think also the idea that that growing up is a thing that happens.
Yeah.
You know, that when really it's just sort of, it's almost like a constant, it's your entire life.
A lot of people they'll say like, I used to blank, but then I grew up. And you get people, and that sort of intersects with a lot of stuff we like, right? They're like, I used to watch comic book movies or buy toys or play video games, but then I grew up. And I hear that a lot. And just the fact that we like a lot of those sort of I don't know, I would say pillars of pop culture, in many ways makes us seem like we're not really grown-ups. We're kind of emotionally stunted.
To be fair, we are, we have children's jobs.
Yes.
I think the best description of video game journalism is it's writing book reports about toys.
Yeah, and as a caveat, thank you for getting ahead of that, because I think that's an important thing to say, that this conversation specifically is coming from people who've kind of faked having a real actual adult job. So in terms of having to grow up in that department, yes, we still get paychecks and do our 401k and taxes, and we still wake up in the morning and have to go to work and commute like everybody else does. But growing up is a little weirder for us.
Yeah, and we're also, we're millennials.
Yeah.
There's a whole sort of stunted generation there, and at the same time, who's to say that that's new? I feel like there's always that kind of trickle down effect of the generation older will always kind of look down on whatever the younger generation is doing,
Yeah.
And there's we're kind of fuck around idiots, let's be real about it. We're a couple of goofballs who kind of lucked out in a lot of ways, and I definitely recognize that, but at the same time, I think we are sort of figuring it out.
Yeah.
We're getting the hang of it. There's little things that it creeps up on you too. That's the funny part about growing up is it doesn't happen all at once, but you do catch these it's like the Karate Kid, it's like the wax on, wax off thing where suddenly you're like, shit, I know how to do that, or I know what that is, or I'm not scared of that anymore.
So then that poses a good question then, right? Is growing up sort of measured by knowledge?
No.
See?
I don't know.
Pop quiz, hot shot.
Yeah.
It's tough, right? Because I think that
I think it's a mix.
I think that it's a moving target that changes generationally, right? We kind of scoffed at an 18-year-old not knowing what he's doing, but in a lot of ways, an 18-year-old that goes to war is doing a lot more of a significant grown-up, kind of adult, mature thing than anybody.
Yeah, my stepmom's father, who passed away pretty recently, but he was in World War II. When he was fucking 19 years old, his job was to fly a goddamn bomber.
Right.
And it got shot down over Germany, and he managed to keep the fucking plane in the air so all of his friends could jump out with their parachutes, and then he crawled through the plane and jumped out and then landed, I think, in Germany and got captured and put in a POW camp. And he got out, and he's 20.
Right.
what the fuck? Like when I was 20, I lived at home, you know?
And he couldn't buy booze.
I think he probably could have back then.
Maybe.
I don't even.
But he couldn't buy booze now.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean it's all backwards and stunted, and it's like I don't know. At the same time, I don't know. Like there's the amount of information that we consume. Like I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that I know off the top of my head that he didn't know just sheerly through kind of like lack of access to. Like we're all tapped into the internet. You know, it's a different thing.
Well, because growing up is something that is. It's sort of seen as a rite of passage. It's seen as something you have to do. When you don't do it, people tell you to do it on the spot. People go, grow up, Max.
Right.
Or why don't you I need you to be a grown up. I want you to be an adult about
I've always
this.
thought that sort of approach to maturity is something that's sort of clung to by scared people who aren't actually growing up or aren't actually like, I remember being like in high school and I'd, make a fart joke or goof around or say some stupid shit or, watch cartoons and be okay with
Right.
it. And somebody would be like, ugh, you're so immature. And I was like, am I?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm kind of owning the fact that I'm a teenager right now and not really worrying about it too hard.
Well, to me nowadays, especially, immaturity is another thing that's hard to sort of qualify, right? Because what does it even mean? Mm-hmm. Like, does it mean that you still like stuff that you liked when you were a kid? Because then anybody who likes sports is being immature. Because like, I don't know, I played baseball and soccer and like street hockey until I was like 13.
Yeah.
And then I stopped and I moved on to some other stuff, which was equally immature and childish. But if like there are, grown adults that are really into that, and is that immature? I don't know. I mean, my dad owns a house and got married and had 3 kids and 2 cars, but he loves the Mets. Is that immature of him to like watch 20-somethings like wear colorful animal adorned clothing with numbers on them and track their stats and see who's better or worse?
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of his RPG, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that it's also like what you did. I think we touched on this in our nostalgia episode, but it's like the thing you did as a kid is like you kind of take it with you. Mm-hmm. And I think if enough people sort of hang on to that sort of thing, it stops being a childish thing,
Right. Well, so you get a lot of people saying, I need you to grow up or be an adult or grow up or when I grew up, but it's very rare where people kind of celebrate in your actions you being a kid as an adult. Like it's like they'll be like, he looked at it with a childlike wonder.
Yeah, there's the whole inner child thing.
Yeah, there's that like he's got the inner child, or like, they'll be like, he's like, he's being immature, but that's a negative as well. Like it's very rare.
It's hard to put your finger on what immaturity actually is.
Yeah.
I think that, especially, the Infinity War just opened. It's like a bunch of colorful superheroes jumping around and doing stuff. And it's the most successful movie in a while, ever, period.
And it's based on like drawings that were on pieces of paper for mostly children.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. It doesn't mean that it's like highbrow cinema.
Yeah.
But it's also like, I don't know, a whole lot of adults worked on that. That's people's jobs. That's people's livings. And it's, I don't know. And like, I don't know, we've got that security guard at IGN he's stoked on the superhero movies. He loves to go see them. And I would consider him, like, he's a former cop, so I would consider him like a super grown up.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Because
cops are
like, that's like grown up the job.
Yeah.
You're like an upholder of rules.
So yeah, I find that difficult. I know that like growing up is something that you have to do because it physically happens to you. There's a physical attribution to that, right? But there's also something that you have to kind of volunteer for. Like as I've grown up, whatever you want to call this, I've watched my language evolve. And that's not necessarily. Here's the thing, and I have a weird theory about this because I know that we're in this like heated battle right now as we speak about sort of comedy culture and if we are becoming too sensitive to things. But I think that with growing up comes a certain sort of ratio of understanding your words and not necessarily how they hurt people or how they impact people, but sort of what they actually mean. And I think when you're a kid, you can say stuff like, we were playing Call of Duty and the other team raped us, right? Or like microtransactions they're like a cancer on my wallet.
Right.
And then you grow up and you date someone who was a rape survivor, or you lose a loved one to cancer. And it makes you go like, oh, that's probably not the best word for that. And so it makes your language grow up a little bit. And that's something I'm conscious of. And I think that gets kind of brushed aside for being something that we're only doing out of like sensitivity because we're afraid of offending people. But I think a lot of that is
No, it's empathy.
Yeah.
It's being considerate.
right. And so I think empathy is something that comes with personal growth. And it's something you have to track yourself. It's weird because in a lot of those situations, people don't exactly tell you that's right or wrong. It's something you sort of have to figure out on your own. I think that is growth. Growth is physical. It's getting taller and wider. And
No, I mean, we were talking about this today, but we've been doing our other podcast, The Comedy Button, for 7 years, coming up on 7, I think. And that's a minute. And 7 years ago, we were considerably different people. And we never advertised that show as a show about growing up. But we've kind of, I don't know, there's stuff in those early episodes that I'm not proud of because that wasn't me. That wasn't present me who said those things. And I'm not really. I think my chances of being a politician are long gone. Then again, you can also still say horrible things and succeed in politics. But like, if anybody were to call me out on that, I'd be like, that's not me. That was me.
yeah.
And things have changed. I think it's very easy to kind of encapsulate, somebody's sort of opinions and mentality about things, and just be like, this person said this, and to see that person as like a finite known quantity. And I think the internet makes this worse too because everybody's sort of crystallized. Everybody's kind of like, you're a paper trail.
Yeah.
I was actually really surprised. There was an interview with Frank Miller, the comics writer, comics artist, who I used to adore. I used to love him when I was like 19. I like to think that I've sort of grown out of it.
Yeah.
But he makes very angry comics. He makes them sometimes they're really smart. Sometimes they're kind of adolescent, but like, Sin City is very, very, hard-boiled and intentionally gritty. And he's got like an interesting approach to sort of tackling masculinity and how he represents women. And there's stuff in there that I, not as an adult, but in time since then, I kind of recognize there are problems with it. And I still love his old stuff. And his new stuff, I haven't been crazy about because it's accompanied with stuff that he said. Like he went off about the 99% or the Occupy movement.
Right.
And he just said a bunch of shit about that. And he said some stuff that's sort of like Islamophobic. And I'm just like, who is this like crabby, shitty old man? And just recently he did an interview where he pretty much was like, yeah, that's, I said some stuff and I don't necessarily agree with the stuff I said. And he didn't outright like apologize for it, but he pretty much acknowledged that like a person is a constantly shifting, changing, evolving thing.
Yeah.
And it was the first time Frank Miller's done anything in like 15 years that I've been really happy about it. And just for him to be like, yeah, man, I don't agree with the things that I was saying there. To be like, I don't agree with the things that I'm saying.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you can change.
Well, and I think you're totally onto something because I think that like stubbornness is the number one enemy of growing up in a weird way. It's completely antithetical. And I think that when you look at, and it's easier to be stubborn because it's defiance. It's holding down your ground. It's pride. It's a lot of things that we've talked about on other episodes. We're talking about today. And it's sort of, it's middle fingers up to the face of personal change in a lot of ways. I think that's what stubbornness sort of comes down to. Or like, maybe being right about something and then 10 other people are wrong. You can be stubborn there. That's a word for a different episode. But I do think that that's a big part of growing up is not necessarily just sympathy or just empathy, but also being able to sort of go like, oh, like I made a mistake. I can identify it. And now I'm going to like fix it or I'm going to move on.
When I think of like stubbornness, I think of it being just like you're being static. You're digging your heels in. You're really just like kind of putting your foot down. And I think of like when you think of a baby having a tantrum, like maybe, they're in the IKEA and they want the stuffed animal and they're on the concrete floor and they're kicking and screaming and they just sit on the ground and their parents have to come and pick them up or drag them away or whatever. And there's this like physical resistance to movement, to change of just either where they are, how they're behaving, the scenario in general. Like there's this kind of, the stubbornness is very like, it's a blockade really. And that's not what growing up is,
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know, there is the kind of discussion of political correctness. And there's the whole idea of like, or like being a social justice warrior or whatever. And like, I mean, I'm sure that what we're doing probably sounds like virtue signaling, being like, we're doing the good thing. But I don't know. I don't know.
It's problematic triggering.
There we go. Yes.
I have no idea.
I don't know. Yeah. Soy.
That's just word salad.
No, exactly. But like, I think that you see this behavior of like stubbornness and of really just like clinging to a principle You see that among toddlers and among teenagers and among really old people.
Yeah, and I think we're all guilty of it daily.
And people definitely carry it with them.
Yeah.
But I mean that, I don't know, it's like the shit, like, you don't, like, just be nice to people around you, and you know.
I was when you told me about how you wanted to do this episode. The first, like, I do this like sort of word identification thing, and I think a good question is, when you think of growing up, what is the first thing that you think of? And like, ask yourself that. I mean, write it in the comments if you're in the comments of this video. But if you're listening, just ask yourself. And my weird response to that was the dad. Oh, maybe not. But there's that movie. I think it was that movie, The Santa Claus. There's that fucking guy that wants that whistle.
Oh yeah. It's Judge Reinhold.
Judge Reinhold.
Santa Claus. Yeah.
He really wants
the
this
Oscar
like
Mayer Wiener whistle.
Yeah, he wants the. It's like a fucking little hot dog penis whistle.
Was that just like a gay joke at his
maybe
expense?
I don't know. Maybe, but like, to me, like, he's grown up. He's a corporate dude. He's suit and tie. When you think of growing up, or you think of grown-ups, you think of a guy. He's got the suit, he's got a briefcase. He's like all buttoned up. The briefcase is full of papers or a laptop. He's a business guy. He's no frills, no bullshit. He is a grown man.
Yeah, he's like Steve Martin in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
I like my steak and my potato. I am a grown-up. This guy like spends the whole movie sort of being like, I'm a grown-up. But I never really got that like hot dog whistle I really wanted as a kid. That thing's funny. Like, it looks like a dick, but hot dogs are great, and it makes noise. Like, that's annoying to real adults. Like, adults hate whistles. Whistles are like one of the biggest enemies of adults. They're constantly telling us where to stop. Or if a cop gets a whistle, that's a superpower.
That's a good point.
And so I thought about him, and I'm like, well, that's a guy who was sort of balancing like this weird icon of pop culture and nerdery in his life, in an era where I think we were on the precipice of being really okay with a lot of those things being in our own personal lives. You and I and most people, you have pop culture tattoos. We have stickers on our laptops. If you're watching this show or listening to the show, you probably own video games, or like you have movies displayed or art books or toys or something like that.
Yeah, that's less of a thing,
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like that whole mentality of trying to sort of protect that image and uphold that sort of that front of maturity is you don't. I feel like people don't really do that because that's, and I mean, again, this is a generational thing too. I feel like people don't really do that because they feel like they should. It's more that they're afraid that people would judge them if they don't.
Yes, that's exactly it.
It's a front, and the whole thing, the whole thing is his shell is cracked by the end of the film, and Tim Allen arrives to give him the hot dog whistle. I love that. That's.
I mean,
really,
I cover
really
a lot of
that.
I cover a lot of Nintendo stuff at my job, and one of the big sort of tenets of their evolution through the world is handheld gaming, and handheld gaming is inherently portable, which means that anywhere you go, you're effectively displaying this triumphant love and adoration for something that is probably shunned upon by certain people in certain places. And going to a place like Japan, it was weird because I would see businessmen on a Switch or a Vita or something like that. So that's a cultural thing, but I've gotten a lot of messages from people over the years, from people who are just kind of like, I don't like holding my handhelds out in public because like I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed of it. And I was always like kind of taken aback by that, because for me, a reason to not have those things out is that you have an adult understanding of the world that someone could steal that from you and it's gone. And Nintendo doesn't have cloud saves. Get it together, Nintendo. So it's difficult, right? But for a lot of people, it's this thing that they're sort of ashamed of. And I think that like, weirdly growing up is not necessarily just evolving for where you don't hold a Nintendo Switch in public, but it's evolving to a point where you're okay with holding one.
Right. No, exactly. It's your, I don't know. I think we get that excuse of like, oh, it's actually, we're working. This is a real thing. But, that level of insecurity of like, and I mean, I went through high school and like, I don't know. I love Dragon Ball Z and I love Star Wars, and like Star Wars was always like the more acceptable thing there. And like Dragon Ball Z was like, I was like, oh, I have to keep this a secret because it's like, and honestly, that was like pretty, like my lameness was seen from a mile away there. Like it was like, that was Dragon Ball Z was sort of like, you're digging in pretty low on the list there. But I remember being in the school computer lab, and I was looking at a bunch of Dragon Ball Z stuff, and it was like action figures or something like, and I was again, toys. And I'm looking at this, and this girl was there, and she's like, what are you looking at? And I was like, shit, a girl. And she's like, is that like wrestling? And I was like, yes, it is. Because wrestling was more acceptable and identifiable than explaining that it's a Japanese cartoon based on Chinese folklore where men catch fire and hit each other. Like, it's
how
just,
fucking weird is that? Dude, I did this in Old Navy the other day where I went there to buy boxer shorts and the guy was like, "Can I help you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm just looking to buy some stuff." And he was like, "What are you looking to buy?" And I go, "Socks."
Because I'm thinking afraid that he's going to find out you wear underwear.
Then I'm afraid that he's going to find out that I'm trying to buy one of the 10 things they sell.
Yeah.
And so I said socks because I know that socks are always friends with boxer shorts in the store. So he's like, "Oh, okay, I'll show you where the socks are." And then I had to like look at a bunch of socks and pretend I wanted to buy socks. And then the stupidest part about all this is that in my rush to hide like how juvenile I perceived it is to buy boxer shorts, I go to their sock section, and Old Navy currently, if you're watching this episode right now, has Nintendo socks. So I pick up the Super Mario ones, which are like baby blue and have like little 8-bit Marios on them. I'm like, "Oh, these are cool." And I was like, wait a minute, I lied to that man to seem like more of a grown-up, that I didn't need boxer shorts, I needed socks, which is irrational.
Yeah.
And then I ended up being a child anyway. Like, it's pretty stupid. But I think that like that's the thing I want to sort of solve today is this: where do you kind of fix this intersection of now being allowed to be sort of childish and immature and being okay with like having some toys and some games and some stuff like that in your life, but also being an adult about it? And I think one of those cross sections is something as simple as frames. Frames.
Oh God, you're going to go on this again.
No, I'm not. I just think there's something very simple about like, it's like, okay, you can be not a grown up and just duct tape a poster to your wall, or you can buy a frame, and all of a sudden it is a grown-up way of putting the stupidest shit on earth in the middle of your living room. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
So and it's also like, I don't know, I don't wear a lot of like really over the top stuff that shows how much I love something, but like I'll wear like a Star Wars pin or like a subtle T-shirt or something like that. And that's the kind of way I can be like, I'm an adult, I can go to a nice restaurant, but I'll look over at this restaurant and someone will see me and we give this nod to each other like it's Fight Club. And it's kind of like, oh, he likes Star Wars too. Got it.
That's always my favorite thing is when I disguise myself as like a real adult. I used to. I don't do this as much anymore because I think I travel more. But I used to get like a little bit dressed up when I flew because I always liked the idea that like nobody knew what I did.
Yeah.
And they would never know my secret that I'm in fact a giant 10-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, that man's probably doing business. And I'm like, no, I'm flying somewhere to interview people about superheroes or whatever.
I always try to dress up a little nice when I get on an airplane. I got on an airplane leaving my honeymoon in like sweatpants and a baby blue T-shirt, and I just looked like the biggest mess.
Yeah.
And like, you know, like the little things started happening. Like they didn't give me as much wine because they're just like, what's this guy's... We don't really know what this guy can do.
I think that there's this, I mean, again, there's that sort of stubbornness and that resistance to change. And people will be like, well, what's wrong with what I wear? What's wrong with how I dress? And it's like, well, I don't know. People look at you. Like, I don't know. I dress like I dress like Axel Foley's friend who gets killed at the beginning of Beverly Hills Cop. Axel, man, I got bearer bonds. They're untraceable. It's going to be great. And then execution style. But like, I don't know. Like at the same time, I'm kind of like, I understand what I'm wearing. And it's like, I've kind of found like that balance. And I think that there's that, like I took a fashion class in college, just kind of out of curiosity and also to meet girls. But it was this like, the teacher was always like very like just dressed up to the nines. And she's like, I only wear jeans on Saturdays, like weird shit like that. She's very old school. Like she's kind of a nutty woman, but like her whole thing was like, yeah, I mean, it's basically like the what's her name? Tyra Banks, like always be camera ready.
Right.
It's sort of like if you're going to go out in the world and you want people to treat you a certain way, present yourself a certain way, make that effort to do that. And I think that really applies kind of across the board to everything. Like, I don't know, if you're going to be playing a handheld in public, is it the handheld you're worried about or is it the person it's attached to? You know?
Right.
Like, at the end of the day, like, it's important to kind of look at your insecurities and look at sort of what the thing is that you're hung up on, and where does that come from? Why what is the root of the pain there? You know?
Well, like children, like I think that it's like it's important to always have like a bit of childlike wonder, right? I think that's important. But there's a lot of shit that kids don't have to deal with. Like kids don't have to shave, hopefully, unless you're like a wolf child. Kids don't have to do laundry. You can be 10 and just go to anywhere covered in stains, and people are just like, oh, he was probably just drooling and shit.
No, yeah, we were talking to our colleague Justin Davis about this, who's got kids, and there's that whole thing where when you see a kid who's just dressed up like a lost and found threw up on him, like he's just there's like cowboy boots and a tiara and like a fairy skirt and like a cape and there's like mud on the shirt, and it's like he's like, anytime you see that kid was not having a good morning.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like the parents were like, all right, fuck it. You can wear whatever you want. I don't care. I'm done fighting with you.
Yeah,
because the kid was having a little tantrum.
That's a parent being like, yeah, I mean, just, I can't do this anymore. Get out there with nonsense
At the
clothes.
same time, if the kid is wearing like, like little Dockers and like Sperry topsiders, like who are they trying to fool? Like,
yeah.
What is that?
I had that growing up where I got dressed up in button down shit, and like I looked like a little like colonial boy. And then like third grade hit, and I was like, I want to wear my own clothes, and I wore a Super Mario Brothers 3 like tracksuit to school, and it's in picture day. And I'm just like, forever, that's the picture. It's like, I'm just like Mario 3, which is weird because, I still love that game. But like, that was me being like, I'm a grown up. I can do this myself. And then I couldn't. And it took me a long time to be able to do that. And in many ways, I still have no idea.
Yeah, you still haven't grown up.
No.
You're figuring it out. You know? And then I think there's also that there's no win scenario. Like there's a lot of them. There's a lot of good outcomes. There's a lot of good endings. But I think to see growing up as like a thing that you can complete is missing the point, in the same way that seeing like success as a finite, like kind of hard stop concept, like, oh, you got an A+ in turning 30, you are now an adult and you're off to a great start. Like no matter what you're doing, you're fucking something up.
It's not something that is tracked by knowledge. It's not something that's tracked by age. It's not something that's tracked by personal wealth or collection of things of monetary value.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to think that like if like my dad, when my parents got married and they were in their early 20s, they had 2 kids and they bought a house, and I was like, wow, he grew up. Like, but he just didn't know what the fuck he was doing in a house instead of just a 1-bedroom apartment.
That's exactly,
like me.
Dude, so this last weekend, you went and saw Infinity War with a bunch of people on Saturday, and I could not go do that because I had some stuff I had to do around the house. I had to refinish my back porch. I don't think refinish is the right term. I had to put this poison on it that makes the gray stuff come off.
I don't think that's refinishing.
And you rub it with a broom, and you spray it with the hose.
That's de-grayscaling.
De-grayscale. Okay, so you know what it's called.
No, I made a Game of Thrones joke.
De-grayscaling. Okay. So anyway, I was the porch was in grayscale, and I want it in CMYK. I don't know, but yeah.
It turns to stone like the guy that touched the thing in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, my porch is sick with snake disorders. Yeah. Like
you got to repoison it.
I had to poison my part of my home.
Yep.
But it's like one of those things. The whole time I'm doing it, I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm not a grown up. Why am I here? And like, dude, that's the thing. Is like, I don't know. If I go to the toy aisle at Target, I feel like a pedophile.
Yeah.
And if I go to Home Depot, I feel like a fucking imposter. So like, I don't know what I'm doing on Earth.
I went to a zoo by myself in Portland thinking like, wow, this is so cool. This is an adult thing I could do. I'm at the zoo by myself. And then I started looking around, and all these mothers were like, who's this dude at the zoo by himself? Like, again, context is everything. So like, if I had just stayed on a park bench and played a Nintendo Switch somewhere, no one would have judged me. But instead, I went to the zoo by myself at like 9 a.m, and people are kind of like, "Is he here to take the kids? Like he's gonna steal a kid?" And I'm like, "No, I don't want your shitty kid. Like I'm just trying to have I want to see the bears.
Yeah,
I want to see.
What's wrong with you? Why'd you bring
I'm an
your
adult.
children to this place where they got dangerous animals?
Yeah,
sick parents.
I'm here to see the elephant because he might poop.
And
that's gonna be funny to me. No, so like that's the thing. It's hard to say this is what it is, but I think it's something that it's important to be conscious that you're doing, but it's also important to not do to a point that you lose everything about who you were until you got there. Like growing up is not just shedding layers of skin that defined who you were leading to it.
Yeah, I like that. It's not really go big or go home. It's kind of, it's also like a gradual thing. Like I think the idea, there's that old like Bible verse it's like, what is it? When I was a child, I spoke like a child, but as I got old, I threw away my childish things or whatever. And it's like the idea that you just you just throw away childhood. And that's kind of like I feel like all or nothing, like stunted, Mike Pence shit right there.
Yeah, that sucks.
And it's also, I don't know, you're going to have to kind of revisit childhood stuff anyway if you have kids. And I think, I don't know, do you want to wind up being like a shitty, stubborn old dad like Kratos, or do you want to be like a person that, has a healthy relationship with your kids? But I mean, that's all. I guess that's it. Is like when you grow up, it's not like a full metamorphosis. It's not like you have shed your vestigial wings and you've grown this carapace or something. Like you're still you.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of checking in on that part that you still love, and then kind of seeing what parts of it you can carry with you. I had this thing the other day where I realized, because I'm about to become a father, I realized that when I was 13 years old, had this sort of fork in the road. So to explain, I'm the oldest of 3 kids in my family, all boys. And my younger brother is 3 years younger than me. And my youngest brother is 8 years younger than me, which means that when I was 13 and I was ready to become a teenager and an adult and start drinking and smoking cigarettes and really all that, not really at 13, but start looking. I grew up real fast. No, to start moving towards sort of adulthood, right? I mean, you're a year or two away from high school and you're you start moving in that direction. I had a brother who was 5 and he was like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "That's Nintendo." And he was like, "Show me." And I was like, "Okay." And I sat down next to him and I beat Mario 3 in front of him, and he was like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's Batman. Have you heard of Batman, the animated series?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "Well, it's a cartoon. I guess you're allowed to watch it. Here, let's watch it."
Nice.
And it's about, melting theater actors and nightmare clowns and all sorts of fucked up shit.
Icemen who kill their wives or whatever.
Mutated toilet people and
homeless internment camps.
It's horrible. But we watched every episode together, and my parents, and this seems crazy nowadays, my parents would let me, when I hit a certain age, babysit both my brothers. So I had this thing where I'm like, I'm an adult enough to watch them both, but I'm also having this Renaissance level second childhood. Just as I'm about to exit my own childhood into teenage years and adulthood, I have this little kid, this brother, who's reconnecting me with all of those things all over again. And it made me totally remember why I love them, which I then carried into my adulthood, which I then carried into my career, which I will now carry into the next phase of my life, which is fatherhood. Just as I think, and I think a lot of adults do that too, childhood has left the building, immaturity has left the building, juvenile habits have disappeared from them, and they have a kid, and then they look down and they're like, "Oh, I'm building again. I'm playing again." They have this kind of second childhood through all of that. So I think that's something that you don't even have to do. You don't have to have a younger brother or have a kid to identify or recognize. I think it's something as simple as sort of tracking the stuff that you loved when you were a kid, and then maybe also revisiting it and seeing why you love it as an adult, right?
Oh, totally.
That's something I think you and I do a lot, is we watch shit that we grew up with and we see it from a different perspective as adults.
We recognize how totally warped Batman the Animated Series is. And, we also, we realize that some things are just terrible and stupid, but we're well, we loved them. I don't know. There's no right way to grow up. I think there's a certain margin of failure that everyone's going to have to tolerate. And the idea is that maybe I don't know. I think that don't act like you're killing parts of yourself by growing up. Don't act like you have to there's a difference between letting go and just jettisoning something. You're not dumping your childhood behind you and then shunning it forever. And at the same time, if childish things present themselves to you, maybe, I don't know, look at them who is this for? Is this for me? If it's not, then what's the problem?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Because I think that's it's sort of identifying this is definitely not for me, but I respect it for someone else, or this isn't for me, but there's parts of it that I can make for me. I think this is funny, I think I look at Nintendo Labo, right? It's one of those things that definitely for kids.
Yeah.
But I was I'm going to make a beat out of the piano and it's going to sound haunting and dystopian. I'm oh, let me try that.
Yeah. And you didn't, I don't know, you play with some baby's toys and it's you're not you're not being like, this will impress people. You're like, well, I understand why this might seem silly to someone, but I'm okay with where I am and what's going on.
Growing up is weird because maybe you can agree with me on this, but I feel like some of the coldest and sort of most like tough and distant people that I know on earth are the ones that grew up too fast, or at least didn't have enough of their childhood. Like I know people who at a very, very young age, and this is something that was definitely generational back in the day, people had to go to work when they were like 10, 5 in factories.
No, I mean,
this
is definitely coming from like a place of like luxury and
completely,
having it easy. At the same time, I also, I think I read something about like, it was one of those scientific studies where it was like, you paid these guys to figure that out. It was like, it says that people or like adults who gravitate towards like recollecting like childhood things or like toys or whatever, it's as though that they're trying to make up for some trauma from childhood. And I was like, well, no fucking kidding. Yeah. Obviously. Yes. That's what a midlife crisis is, you stooges. How do I get on one of those where it's just like, yeah, we've discovered that Bacardi research shows that it fucks you up real bad. And you're like, well, no kidding. Duh.
Yeah.
It's like,
you pay that guy to get drunk?
You had to write a paper about it?
Why weren't we in the study where they're like, here's $1,000 to buy toys and tell us how you feel afterwards?
Yeah. Do you feel better? Are you? Do you have unfinished trauma from your childhood? I'm like, yeah. Of course.
Like, no, I still feel empty because it turns out the act of trying to get something is more fun than actually having it.
Yeah.
But that's a different discussion entirely. Anyway, that's some thoughts on growing up. Let us know what you think about growing up, if you're still growing up, if that's something you did already, or if it's something you'll never ever do.
What's it like being an adult? Let us know.
Yeah, we have no idea.
You can email us weirdheat@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, weirdheat, or Max Scoville, Agent Bizzle. We also have a Weird Heat Facebook group, which is facebook.com/group/weirdheat. Of course, the best place to go, because it helps us out, is patreon.com/weirdheat. You can kick us $1 and you get early episodes, and we pull polls. People really wanted to hear our thoughts on growing up, even more than last episode, which is isolation. People really want to hear us talk about crying, and what was the other one? Collecting.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of topics to cover, a lot of ground to cover. Little fun fact, this show was almost called Kidults, and it was going to be a show about growing up and shit.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit more concise than the ever shifting elevator pitch for Weird Heat, but here we are. Mm-hmm. I almost guarantee we're going to be talking about growing up some more. Yeah,
this is definitely one we'll consider coming back to again, because I think even looking what we're all doing right now, I mean, it changes day to day, right? So I think being able to track that and being able to evolve from that and being able to grow up from that is it's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, and we can look back at this recording and go, wow, we didn't know what the hell we were talking about. I'm embarrassed by that. We've grown up since then. But in the meantime, I guess we did our best.
So. We did everything we could do to grow up.
This is Weird Heat.
Thank you.
You mean to tell me that I'm busting my ass for sending money home for you and Mom? And you're sitting at home doing this shit? Stop fucking around and be a man. There ain't nothing out here for you. Yes, there is. This.